Great. So good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar, Dynamics SL Security from A to Z. My name is Liz Pateo, and along with Dermot Bowden of Tribridge, we will go ahead and be presenting some security best practices for Dynamics SL, tips and tricks, some information about how best to secure your system, including covering some details regarding audit trail and segregation of duties. So with that being said, this webinar is being recorded. If you would like to view it after this session, it will be available on our website shortly after the conclusion of the webinar, and you can feel free to share the link to it with other members of your organization or anyone else that you feel would benefit from watching this presentation. And so again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. A little bit about us. Dermot Bowden is a Dynamics SL solution architect for Tribridge, and I am the director of sales here at Fastpath. So I have been with Fastpath for about 5 years now. I am certified in Risk and Information Systems Control. I have more than 20 years experience as in both Dynamics SL and GP as an end user consultant, and now on the sales side. And I've worked with many publicly traded companies or pre-IPO companies to make sure that they were SOX compliant. So you could say that security is near and dear to my heart. Dermot has been, as a Dynamics SL solution architect, has overall responsibility for the design, delivery, and performance of SL implementations. We consider him an SL guru and love working with him because of his product knowledge. He has more than 20 years consulting experience in both Dynamics SL and GP, and he has significant experience in the project, service, and distribution series of SL. So today we're going to talk about security best practices, access rights and role-based menus, customization groups, audit trail procedures and tools, segregation of duties, best practices and tools, Dynamics SL system file security, and then we'll wrap it up with a question and answer session. So if there's any questions, you can ask them. I think there is the ability to either raise your hand or enter a question into the question box, so we'll make sure that we address those questions as they come in. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dermot, and I will be joining you a little bit later in this presentation.
All right, great. Well, excellent. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, what I really want to do is kind of start and talk about generalizations around security initially, and then we'll get into really the best practices about setting up security within Dynamics SL. There's always kind of some unknowns when you're starting to tackle security within SL. So hopefully this presentation will kind of shed some light on how to really best tackle setting up, our actual security itself. One of the things that we certainly want to do is we want to take a very high level when we start thinking about security within our ERP. And what I mean by that is our ERP is part of our whole corporate infrastructure. And so at the corporate level, I mean, every company has its standard operating procedures. It's got its processes, whether it be in the ERP, whether it be in sales, whether it be in any of the operations. And so I know it sounds kind of strange, but we actually have to look at it at a very high level first. We have to see how our security within our ERP and within Dynamics SL specifically, how it fits within the whole corporate structure and how the whole company kind of needs to operate and where those division of duties need to be, where everyone's roles kind of lay out, whether it be in the ERP or whether it be in sales, and whether there's a crossover and what that all looks like. That's really important, and a lot of times companies will have that documented, but more often than not, it's not documented anywhere. So it's the biggest challenge that companies have when they're starting to think about security. But it is critical to kind of think about it at that level. Once again, there's a lot of compliance that people have to think about, especially with an accounting system. So your external or internal auditors are certainly going to have some compliance around your financial system. There's going to be stuff that tax-wise that's going to need some compliance. And what is that? What do we mean by compliance? Well, we mean the retention of data within your financial system. But it's more than that. A lot of times it's about who recorded the financial transaction. And this is critical, particularly in larger companies and publicly held companies that are under Sarbanes. That's a critical need. And so it's more than just retention of financial data. It's also documenting the transactions within that data set. It's in the financial data. So it's who created the transactions, when it happened, and some documentation around what that transaction was actually all about. And so that's really key. All right. Audit trails. That's one of those things where, let me go back one. That's really one of those things that is going to be more and more important. Basically, like I said, documenting those transactions, and not only document it, but what changed in all of our financial transactions. Basically, it's one thing to capture that something changed within a record, but it's really more important to know what that change was, right? And so, okay, so somebody may have updated a vendor record, for instance, and that's good that we have the person who updated and the time that it updated it, but what's getting to be more and more important is what that change actually was. Was it a change to the address? Was it a change to the 1099 box? Was it, I mean, what exactly changed? That becomes more and more critical as the data becomes more and more critical. So when we're talking about payroll and employees, having that audit trail is much, much more important. So that's one of the things that we always have to take into consideration. Want to make sure. Data integrity is another piece of it. So once again, when we're talking about our corporate infrastructure, we need to think about all those things that kind of come into play, right? That's going to be really important for us. I'm trying to move to the next slide for you guys. Oh, there we go. So one of the things that we, now that we kind of have this idea of what we're trying to accomplish, what we really need to do is think about our access rights strategy. And so when we talk about, okay, now let's tackle our access rights, once again, we want to identify what our users are doing within the financial system. So we know we have, roles within an organization. When we're talking about specifically around our ERP and specifically around Dynamics SL, now we have to think about those user roles and what they really do. So once again, if we're thinking about the accounting system, the finance group, the business group, wherever your organization calls it, what are those people doing within those particular roles? There are people in accounts payable. Are there people in accounts payable that have full reign of accounts payable, or do we have segregation of duties where there's clerical, or there are people that are just responsible for doing the check run, or do we have people that are just responsible for setting up vendors? It's those types of roles that we really have to think about. What we want to do is we want to add users to those groups, so identify those individuals and think about those particular groups, and of course updated with multiple groups. So you want to go ahead and think about that particular group in context of what the person does, but obviously in a smaller organization, a person can wear many hats. So just think about that and think about what makes the most sense. And of course our next thing is going to be to assign those access rights to the reports and screens that we have within SL. We want to make sure that once we do go ahead and assign access rights, that we have a way of looking at it and auditing it and reporting on it and reviewing it and doing all that good stuff. And then we want to test it. So, okay, that's pretty critical. The one thing that you don't want to do, particularly if you're already in the system and you decide that you want to go ahead and change security, you got to make sure you have a testing platform first. The last thing you want to do is start changing security within SL and lock people out of their day-to-day work. So if you're going to make a change, make sure you have a test platform. Make sure you have a development database. Make sure you have a place where this can be tested pretty thoroughly. If you're just implementing SL for the first time, obviously you're going to be doing UAT testing and all that initially with your security. But I cannot stress that enough. You certainly need to test. And then, of course, adjust as needed. So let's get into a little bit of the detail for those of you that are familiar with SL. You're certainly going to recognize the screens that I'm going to review. For those of you who aren't, you'll see maybe see some new stuff. I am doing screenshots of SL 2015. But that process of setting users hasn't really changed, right? Whether you're on 7.0 or 2011 or 2015, the basic concept is the same. There's some new tools in the newer versions, don't get me wrong, especially around quick queries and things like that, but the functionality of setting up these groups are the same. So what's the first thing you do? You create your group. You think about those roles. You think about your company as a whole and those roles and functions that you have within your accounting department, and you start to create those groups. That's the very first thing. So in this case, as an AP clerk, we go ahead and create that group. Next thing we do is we think about the users within those groups, right? And there's actually two ways. You can go ahead and user maintenance within the System Manager screen and just start to say, all right, this particular user is associated with this group, okay? Or there is another way of doing it. What you could do is you could simply go ahead and under group maintenance, you can add the actual users underneath that group. It's just two different ways of actually accomplishing it within the System Manager. Either way, as long as you make that association, I mean that's really the key. All right, so what's the next step? Well, now that I have my groups and I have users associated with the groups, that's kind of the easiest piece. Now I got to go ahead and assign the rights to those groups. Now, within SL, you have an option of assigning access rights to individual users or to groups, and that's where the type comes into play. Our suggestion is never use user. Don't use access rights using the user type, because what you want to do is you want to be able to think through your groups and then assign users to those groups. And when you have a change in staff, you're simply switching out the users within those groups itself. Or as new people come on board, you're simply adding those people to the groups. Don't try to do it to a user level. It's not really the best practice. One of the other things that you want to do when you're in the access rights maintenance screen, there's a preload button for the module. You absolutely should be using that, right? Don't try to go ahead into access rights maintenance and just start to add screens. Oh, I know they need this screen. I know they need that screen. I know they need this report. And there's a really good reason for that. There are screens that are really not intuitive as far as what a user may need within a particular module. There are executables, not to get into a lot of detail, that are used before running certain reports that aren't going to be apparent to you if you just start adding screens. When you preload the module, it loads up everything that's related to that module, including all of these kind of behind-the-scenes executables, what we call the pre-processors in the reports, and some other things that are associated with moving accounts payable into projects and things like that, that could easily be missed if you just decided to just go ahead and not preload and just add the screens yourselves. So I definitely want to make sure if you learn anything, absolutely make sure you preload. That's really, really important. There is screen level security within SL. What that means is in every single screen, we have the ability to either have someone view it, view only. They can update already created items, so they can have view, and the next level is, okay, I can update items that somebody else has actually created, right? And then once again, I can insert new items, right? So I can add new data elements. So if I have view, then I also have update, then I also have insert. And then I have delete, which means I can actually, of course, a delete is not a deleting of a posted transaction. You still have the rules within SL. It means that if you have something that's on hold or imbalance or something that the rules of the ERP allows you to delete it. So if you have view, an update, and insert and delete, you have all those. And then the highest one is going to be what we call initialize mode, which is basically in certain screens you have the ability to add certain things or see certain things in a certain way, and it's used in a lot of the history screens. If you have that initialize mode, it gives you the ability to go ahead and update those. In accounts payable and 1099, you can update in the 1099 tab. You can update that and so on. That's the highest level. So that's kind of the hierarchy of it: view, update, insert, delete, initialize mode. Most people, if they just want a view-only screen, they'll just set the access to view. If they want somebody to have full rights to the screen, they might go all the way up to delete, and in some cases they might go to initialize mode. And that's how the access is laid out. If you look at it, we preloaded accounts payable, and so you'll see that when it loads, its default is to view. Is the view only. And so you have to make a decision then. Okay, well, I preloaded all of the accounts payable screens for the AP clerk. Now I have to make a decision what it is that I want to do for that particular group. Maybe it's view only for vendor maintenance, but of course because we don't want them actually adding vendors, but we want to go ahead and make sure they have full rights to voucher and adjustment. And maybe they don't do a check run, so we'll, but maybe they can see the check batch. So I mean, you have to. That's where the roles come into play and what makes the most sense. And you're working this particular screen to kind of make that actual definition, right? There are reports that you're certainly going to go ahead and utilize to make sure that what you've set up is right. Okay, so a lot of times it's easier to just review these reports and that way, you know, have it kind of passed around and make sure that what you have set up for those roles makes the most sense. One recommendation that I would definitely make is don't work in a vacuum if you're setting up security, particularly if you're on, you know, maybe you're more on the IT side. Get accounting involved and get the users involved. They know a lot of what they're doing on a day-to-day, and they should absolutely be involved in making sure and testing and reviewing what you're setting up for the actual security. I can't stress that enough. If you have SL 2011 or 2015, you have a really great quick query, actually. It's kind of hidden in there because it's part of the System Manager Administrative quick queries, but it's my favorite quick query in the whole system. And it's an access rights details quick query. And what's really great about it is I can go ahead in here and do a quick query and look at a particular screen and see what groups and rights have access to that screen. I can do, be able to slice and dice and query on the actual detail of my access rights is a huge benefit. So just be aware of that. A lot of people don't realize that that particular quick query actually exists, and it's going to be a huge help. Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten that down, that's the basics of SL's security. What I don't have is I have the ability to kind of supplement it a little bit, and that's by using some custom menus. And customizing menus basically isn't security, and it's not really related to security, except that I utilize my security groups when I'm going ahead and creating my menus. And one of the reasons why it kind of goes hand in hand is, like, I have my custom menus that are associated with the security groups that I just created. And so if you create your menus properly, if a person can't see a screen, right, they can't get to it, it's part of your security structure. And so that's part of creating a menu. But the other part of it is to really kind of think through your roles that we just talked about and what that role really does within the system itself. And if we're really thinking along those lines, then we can also think about what their menu should look like and what things they should have on their menu, and make it easier for the user. So it goes hand in hand with their role, and it goes hand in hand with what you want them to do. So not to get into a lot of detail, but you can certainly create a custom menu for each group. In this case, the AP clerk that we were talking about. And I can go ahead and make a menu that has AP processing for the AP clerical group. And they basically have the screens that we've given them security to, and they have their day-to-day processing. Once again, it's easier for the user. They have the things that they have access to. It's their role, and it's role-based. And they have a menu that makes them feel comfortable in their role. All right? One of the things that we can do is we have, remember, our security in SL is screen level. It's not field level. We can kind of get around that a little bit by using what we call customization groups. This is using Customization Manager, and it's something that a lot of people don't kind of take advantage of. A lot of us will customize the screens, and we'll have it at the all user level, and we'll hide fields or add new user fields and do all that. But we could utilize our customization groups to give us a little bit of field level security and field level access. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. One of the things that you can do is you can go ahead and add a customization group that kind of lines up with the security groups that you talked about. So I can say, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and go into customization group maintenance and create a group. And the group itself is it's pretty simple. I mean, it's really going to be the same name as maybe your security groups, right? So in this case, we've been picking on accounts payable today, so we'll stick with that theme. And I created one called the accounts payable clerk on the customization group. The one limit I have within the customization groups is that I can only assign a user to one. So I can't have a user assigned to multiple customization groups. I can assign users to multiple security groups, right, access right groups, but they can only be assigned to one customization group. So you have to think that through a little bit. And so what does that really do? What does that give me the ability to do within the system itself? Well, I'll assign a user, and then I can do a customization around that. I can change my customization level to that one group. In this case, we call it the AP clerk, right? Go into System Manager just like I would do any other customization. And then what I can do is I can pick a field. And in this case, this is just an example of some ideas around what you could do in here. As I can say, all right, you know what? For everybody else, they can just go ahead and I'll let them change the period to post, right? I don't have hard close set. I'll let people change the period post, except my AP clerical group. Kind of want to lock that down. I don't want them to make a mistake. I don't want them to post to a future period or a previous period. I want them just to do the entry in the period that the system is actually displaying. So I can go ahead and disable my period to post field. It's just one example, one idea, right? And so when the AP clerical group goes ahead and opens up voucher and adjustment, don't have the ability to change the period to post. So just think about that as far as the other fields that you have within the system and any type of group and any type of role that you have, and whether you can enable and disable fields. There's a lot of key capability around that, right? One of the things we also have is kind of some audit trail, right? Remember we talked a little bit about that, right? What does SL have as far as audit trails? Well, it's a little bit light, okay? So what you want to do is think about what you need is around the audit trails, right? Think about what's required within your organization, and then look at see what SL kind of offers around that. And so let's talk a little bit about what we really want to do as far as Audit Trail. Right? One of the things is this is going to be an absolute requirement. A lot of larger companies, particularly a lot of big public companies, they absolutely will need to make sure that they have an Audit Trail tool in place. There's no question. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever we use, right, whether it's something that we use like Fastpath or some other third party or some other customization that we've done, we want to make sure that we just audit the things that are absolutely necessary. One of the things that you want to make sure that you don't do is try to audit trail everything within the system, right? So audit only what's necessary. And then, of course, involve the business owners in making sure that you know what you need to audit. And so that when I talk about that, I talk about not only the controllers of the company, but I'm talking about the internal audit, external auditors. Make sure you really get them involved when you're coming up with what needs to be tracked. I can't stress that enough. I mean, the one thing you don't want is an IT department to kind of take on that particular project solo. Okay. Once again, when you're setting up something around audit trails, it is really important to make sure that that's set up correctly, that you're not recording everything that's happening within the system, because that could affect your performance within the system. And so what's a good example of that? Well, you certainly want to audit, trail, and track changes to master records, right? So anything that's happening where it's changing customer information, vendor information, things like that. But you really wouldn't want to go ahead and set up an audit trail system that's tracking changes to transactions, because that's what you do on a day-to-day basis. Users are updating transactions. And so if you're tracking everything, it could cause a problem. So you have to think about what that really means. And then, of course, you need to have a good reporting on it. So audit tracking isn't any good unless you have a good report to kind of be able to look at and review what's being changed within your system itself. Okay. One of the things that most systems, right, when you're kind of looking at audit tracking, they have their own data, known tables that they go ahead and track that system in. And so what you want to do is make sure that that's also being backed up. I mean, it's being, and then you have a retention policy around all of that data too. And so that's another thing to absolutely consider. So once again, high level, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish around audit tracking within a system? And what do we have in SL? Well, out of the box, SL doesn't have true audit tracking. It's got a little bit, let's call it Audit Trail Light, right? But it doesn't have what has particularly changed in a particular record and when it was changed and who. It's got, in every single table within SL, it does track the created user, the program that created the particular record, and the date. So every time that anything gets created, whether it be an accounts payable transaction, whether it be an AR, journal entry, it creates the user that actually created the record, what screen they were in when they created it, and the date that they created it. It also goes ahead and updates every time a change is made to that record, and who the last person was that updated it, the program that actually absolutely updated it, whether they went into another screen to go ahead and make a change to that record, and the date. But that's it. It doesn't tell you what the change was, and that's important. Audit Trail, true audit tracking needs to tell you that. SL just doesn't provide that type. Now, I can still utilize that. I mean, I'm not discounting the fact that SL is telling you the created user and the last updated user, that can be pretty helpful. But it's behind the scenes in in almost all the reports and all the screens. So one of the things that you want to do is expose those particular fields. Make sure you go ahead and display them. And in this case, this is just an example in Customization Manager where I can go ahead and expose the created user field. Basically go ahead and insert that particular field at the header so that when I'm looking at voucher and adjustment, I can see who the actual created user was. Think about that. You can do that in any particular screen, all right, because that's available in every single record. All right. You could also add those for those of you who are on SL 2011 and 2015. Every single one of the queries that you have out there also has the ability to select the created user and the last updated user date and program in all of your queries. So in this example, the AP documents quick query, add the created user to it, and save it as one that you can say, all right, I want to take a look at all my AP documents and I want to see who created each and every one. People forget that it's there, so just make sure that if there's a need to track that within the system, that you create your queries to go ahead and match that functionality. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Liz. I think you want to talk about Fastpath a little bit. Is that right, Liz?
I do. Thank you so much, Dermot. And I have been learning so much. So this has been great so far for me. I hope our attendees feel the same way. So Fastpath Audit Trail, like Dermot said, unfortunately, Dynamics SL, which is true of very many systems, doesn't really have its own inherent audit trail tool built in. So they have kind of left it to ISVs to develop some tracking tools to be able to track data changes. And as Dermot said, it's very, very important to know not just that something has changed, but what has absolutely changed. Because it could be something as innocuous as a spelling mistake that was corrected to something a little bit more concerning, such as a vendor bank account changing or a vendor check name changing, etc. And not to say that it was changed for a malicious reason, but potentially there could be some training issues that you might want to address too. So it could be that the system is, the users are not fully trained in how to best use the system, and that can be found via some audit trails as well. So our tool allows you to see the what, the when, the who, and the how. And what we mean by that is that our tool will show you who's made the change to a specific field that you've selected to track, what the value was before they changed it, what they changed it to, the date and the time, and when we say the how, it tells you where that change came from. So did it come directly from Dynamics SL? Did somebody log into Microsoft SQL Server and run an update statement against your data? Or did it come from an external program? Do you have something else connecting to your SL environment that can update data? So we have the flexibility to see all of that information. And so that's this next point, that it tracks changes made within SL and also from external sources. And that's really important because you want to have an idea of how your SL data can be changed, what programs have the ability to connect directly to that data and make changes, what users can access that data from outside of the system. So it becomes very, very important to have that complete picture of your data. So it allows you to quickly and easily identify areas of concern. You can take those reports and filter them down very quickly. So let's say you have a customer change report and you have your set of data and you review that maybe weekly or monthly just to make sure that everything looks okay. But daily, you want to see any customer whose credit limit has been set to greater than $25,000. We have the ability to build filters in those reports so that you can just drill down to those changes immediately and very easily identify those areas. So you can have lots of flexibility in the reporting that comes out of the tool. And as Dermot brought up before, that reporting is key, okay? It's not enough just to say that you have an audit trail tool. You have to review those reports. And I always like to reinforce the idea of audit only what is necessary. Because if I'm at an organization and my task is to review my audit trail data, I'm going to have a better review if I'm looking at 1,000 rows of data versus 20,000 rows of data, right? By row 1,500, my eyes are going to be crossed. So we want to make sure that we're setting up those audit trails in an efficient manner so that we're just collecting information that's pertinent to the organization, that focuses on our risk areas. And Dermot had mentioned something earlier that we're going to talk about again when we talk about segregation of duties, and that's involving the business process owners. Who better to know what should be monitored than the people that are in the trenches day to day, okay? If I am removed from a particular business process and I'm sitting in IT, and I'm not saying that that role is not important, but I just am not involved in the day-to-day transactions and the day-to-day business processes, I can't sufficiently make a determination on what should be audited. But if I'm the AP manager and I'm dealing with the controller, with the finance manager, with the CFO, with the internal audit team that's coming to me and asking me specific things, I surely am going to have a better idea of what should be audited. So you always want to bring those business process owners to help you set up your audit trail system, okay? So that's a little bit about our audit trail tool. And from here, we're going to move into separation of duties. So Dermot had touched upon separation of duties earlier in the presentation briefly, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it and why it has become so important. Well, number one, separation of duties is a major touchstone for anybody who has to be SOX compliant, but not only that, it should be a major area of concern for anybody who is trying to make sure that their data is not compromised, that their financial assets are not compromised, that their physical assets are not compromised, right? We want to protect our company. And there's many different ways of doing this. So when we talk about separation of duty, it's, talking about making sure that you're not putting significant risk and responsibility in the hands of one single individual. Now, we know that that can't always happen, okay? We have that understanding. Companies run lean. They can't employ one person to press one button all day long, and we totally understand that. So what happens when you can't adequately have this separation of duties and responsibilities? Well, that's where you need to be able to determine those areas where you don't have adequate separation of duties and put other controls around that area, okay? And I can guarantee, so I used to read the paper, right? Everybody used to get a paper delivered to their door in the morning. Now I read it online. The actual paper doesn't get delivered anymore, but every morning I'd be sure to read my local paper. And it seems like at least once a week there's a story of a small business or maybe even a medium to large business, and an individual is being prosecuted for some sort of transgression, whether it be embezzlement, theft of equipment, inventory, fraud of some sort, etc. Right? This can happen anywhere. We're not saying that every employee out there is, intent on causing malice to an organization. Absolutely not. But it does happen, and we need to be able to protect our organization against that. And so the way that we do that is building controls around those areas of risk where we can't adequately have those separation of duties, right? We don't want to give one person the keys to the financial kingdom. So we have a tool at Fastpath that's called Assure. And what Assure does is it has an out-of-the-box rule set for Dynamics SL segregation of duties. What that rule set is comprised of is all of the different potential conflicts a Dynamics SL out-of-the-box installation can have. For example, if somebody has access to create a vendor and they have access to pay a vendor, technically that's a risk. If a user has access to open and close fiscal periods and then they have access to post transactions, that's technically a risk. Somebody can create a financial statement misstatement by posting to a closed period. Okay, somebody can pay a vendor, create a vendor and pay that vendor in an unauthorized fashion if they have those areas. So our rule set finds all of those risks with that security that you've set up in Dynamics SL, and it will tell you for each user which risks exist based on their security in SL. Okay, so you can quickly and easily see where those conflicts exist based on that current security setup. It will drive you to make changes to security if necessary, and where you can't make changes to security, it's going to drive you to build some controls. For example, if somebody has access to create a vendor and they have access to pay that vendor, maybe your control is using the Audit Trail module to audit vendor creation and make sure that there's no inappropriate vendors being set up. Maybe there's a process where checks are, you use your positive pay with the bank so that when checks get cashed at the bank, they have to be matched up with a file that comes automatically out of SL that gives the vendor check name and all that information so that they cannot be altered between the time of check printing and the time of check cashing, etc. So you build that control set. So then we give you the space to document and verify those controls. So I don't know how many of you have dealt with internal or external audit teams kind of coming into your organization and sitting down and wanting to go through all of these processes, but if you've now have a way to very easily report on where your risk areas are, report on your control set, and just kind of give that information to your auditors, all they're going to have to do is test those controls, make sure that they're actually in place and working, and it saves a lot of legwork. Okay, and saving a lot of legwork means that your auditors aren't sitting in front of you every 5 minutes pestering you. You're reducing audit fees significantly for your organization if you have high audit fees. And not only that, you always want to be proactive when it comes to an auditor than reactive. Reactive makes them feel like you haven't given this much thought, and they're gonna get out the bigger microscope. They're gonna get the bigger magnifying glass out on you. Okay, but if you're proactive, then they're going to say, wow, these people are really kind of on top of their game, and they really and truly have a vested interest in keeping their organization and their system secure. Okay, so you want to go for that proactive rather than reactive. And again, our flexible reporting reduces audit time from weeks to hours. We have customers who have spent weeks creating security reports or disseminating security reports that come out of SL to try to find out where these potential conflicts are and reporting on them. And you can literally have that report out of your system in seconds and then take that report and analyze it. And so now you're done in a couple of hours what might have taken you weeks to do. Okay, so that's a little bit about our Fastpath Assure tool and how that tool helps you achieve that segregation of duties awareness. I don't want to say segregation of duties completion, because again, you're never going to have an organization where there are zero conflicts. You're always going to have conflicts. The biggest key is to have that awareness of them, to know where those conflicts reside and to put controls around them, and our tool helps you do that quickly and easily. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Dermot, and he's going to finish up the webinar with some more information directly about Dynamics SL.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Liz. Yeah, well, and one of the things that we're talking about security, and we're talking about security within the ERP and Audit Trails and everything that's so critical to that. I did want to finish up with something that we kind of sometimes forget about a little bit, and that is the file security that's related to Dynamics SL. And what do I mean by that? I mean about the location of files that are critical files that get created out of SL too. So a lot of times that's forgotten about a little bit. And so one of the things that we want to make sure is that, particularly if we're using SL payroll and we're creating direct deposit ACH files, if we're doing any kind of transaction import, and we have files where there's data coming in and there's some log files and control files, and then any kind of EDI transactions. These are all, our event logs and things like that, and then maybe where we have some saved reports. I'm pointing this out because it's an area that's sometimes forgotten. It's part of our security, that we need to think about. We've talked about security within SL and creating the groups and everything like that. Now we have our audit trails in place with Fastpath, and we have separation of duties, and we have all that in place. Let's not forget about some of those other files. I mean, you have no idea how many times I've seen payroll information exported out into a PDF and put into a folder where everybody has access to it. That's a huge mistake, clearly. So one of the things that we have to be really careful about is making sure that we have working in the IT department and making sure that those folders that we have set up for things like critical reports, critical files, are secured too, right? Let's not forget about that. It's pretty amazing that we kind of take it for granted. Oh yeah, you know, that is secure. Well, part of it in SL and the way it's structured is you kind of have to have access to the directory that SL is in. And a lot of companies will give everybody who has SL access full read and write access to the actual directory that SL resides in. That's not always best practice, because if a user has access to that, they can do a little bit of damage unknowingly, but they could certainly delete user reports and things like that. One of the things that we're trying to do for more and more of our customers is make sure that they have a secure location for some of these, and what we call a DFS share. So within the Solomon I, we can say, oh, this is where our user report directory is, and we can have a secure location for those. And these are where our event logs lie, and it's outside of the normal path that SL implies. Then we have a DFS share that has those event logs. The Solomon I allows us to do that. And also for transaction import files and things like that. One of the things that's kind of interesting for those of you who do any kind of transaction import, especially if it's an ongoing thing, and some companies do that. They have they have some processing and stuff like that. Transaction import has a file that's a mapping, and if it's easy to overwrite that, and so if that's not secured anywhere, there could have been a control macro for a transaction import that may have taken months to build, and it's perfect and it's great and it's working perfectly, and a user comes in and they save the log file on top of it by mistake. They're not really, they have full rights to that directory, and they just make that mistake. We see it all the time. So let's make sure we think about that too. I think about not only our security within the ERP, but all of those areas that are outside that may, expose some, reports that we may not want everyone to see, particularly financial reports, and also some files that we certainly don't want to lose. So, and one of the things I just want to point out, there are some other resources out there. Obviously, we talked about Sarbanes-Oxley, so there's a guide that's out there that is helpful. Make sure you kind of take a look at some of that. I mean, Sarbanes is a huge monster regulation, but we can you can certainly have there's a lot of resources online. And then within Dynamics SL, the security guideline that I talked about for file security, there is a PDF for that. So it gets installed with your user guides. It's forgotten, and nobody really even realizes it's there, but there is a security guideline PDF. And so make sure you review that, and it has a lot of great detail about what makes the most sense as far as setting up security around SL. All right. And with that, I guess, Liz, let's open up for questions.
Great, thank you, Dermot. I appreciate that so much. So if anybody has a question, they can raise their hands or they can type it into the chat box. And Dermot, I am going to start with a question. The customization group limitation, is that going to change for future versions, that you can have more than, you can be assigned to more than one customization group? Do you know if there's any plans to change that?
I believe there is, because it has been a limitation of it. So I do believe that is in the works for the next version. I have to confirm, but it's been talked about quite a bit. So.
Okay, great. And then the other comment that I wanted to make, because you talked about some really great features, the customization groups, the adding the fields to the quick queries, where those features are only available in SL 2011 and higher. So really, really good reasons for customers to upgrade, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I can tell you right now, the quick query alone is a game changer for the product. So because it allows you to easily get to a lot of that data, you know, it's so much easier than having to write a report because a lot of times not everybody is a crystal report writer. The quick query is an end user tool, and it allows you to add all the fields that are sort of hidden behind the scenes, particularly the created user field and the last updated user fields and all those within every one of those quick queries, and you can analyze all the data within your system much easier. So yeah, SL 2000 was introduced SL 2011 and of course expanded after 2015.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, and like I said, I learned a lot. And I did want to mention one last thing. Talking about the file security, it's really funny, but coming from the background of of interacting with auditors very, very often, it is probably one of the biggest asks as far as what they're looking for in terms of that security. So it's great that you brought that up, and it's amazing that Dynamics SL does have some features built around that, because that is something that we at Fastpath, but even in prior in prior life, I should say, I have been asked that question many, many times, and that's hugely important. Like you said, you can blow away critical data, or sensitive data can be exposed, and in these days of data breaches and things like that, it becomes very important to make sure that you are securing those files. And so I appreciate that part of the demo very much, or that part of the webinar very much. It's very important to keep that information in mind.
Yeah, absolutely, agree 100%.
Well, I don't believe that we have any questions from the attendees, so I just want to remind everybody that this session has been recorded. It will be available after the presentation on our website. You can go ahead and view it at any time. We'll keep it up there for quite a while. And again, thank you so much. And Dermot, thank you so much. Like I said, this has been for me a very eye-opening and informative presentation, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to give our give our attendees all of this great information regarding Dynamics SL.
Absolutely, anytime. It was great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.